Okay. So we out of the Gestapo, we back home, and there's a dilemma. What shall we do? My father does not know. He asks me to go to the office and try to be guided by some of the people in the office. I go there and they cannot advise me. They said, well, we don't know. It's up to you. So for 1 week, we live in this terrible anxiety and fear, not knowing what to do. And my father said, okay, I'll take a chance. I'll go. He said, you come with me. I said, I'm not going inside. He said, no, you wait outside. It was like a little cafe. Well, I couldn't go into the cafe, but outside. So there's a sentry, the entrance of this Gestapo. He says he has an appointment with, he shows a little slip that functionary, official gave him. So they let him in, and he goes up, and I wait. 30 minutes, an hour, an hour and a half. I said, I think that's it. 2 hours, I see him coming out, and I said, what happened? He said, well, he made me wait. He then finally called me in, and he said, who are you? He said, well, you asked me to come back. Last week, I was here. You asked me to come back. You told me that you would have some leather. You wanted a handbag. He said, oh, yes. He said, I completely forgot. He said, oh, yes. He says, I completely forgot. There are plenty of leather. He says, listen, you leave me your address, and I will write to you, and I will call you. And that was that. And he comes out. Now, we never got any notification. We never got any letter from asking us to come back. Maybe he was trying to try us to see if would be, I don't know what was his intention, but he never called. And in the meantime, I was back at my job doing mailing and doing my petty cash. I was also had some petty cash. And people were just amazed that I would be able to come out of the Gestapo, which was very unusual, because once you got inside, being Jewish, you never came out. You were immediately, guilty or not guilty, you were sent to the Drancy and then deported. That was July 1943. My brother, because he had such a close call, he said, I cannot stay, and he had been already 13 months since August 1942, and it was already September. He said 13 months, and he was getting weak-like, pale. He didn't get enough food, and I remember him in front of this window. He would sunbathe. He would open the window and try to get a little bit of sunshine, in the summer. And we said, well, we have to get, he said, I have to get out somehow. How, when, where, we don't know. We had a friend who belonged to the Communist Party, and the most difficult thing to get was a working permit, a blank, that you work, because they would arrest you, and if you showed that you worked, they would let you go. But you needed also forged papers. Now there were two essential ideas that, in order to circulate, was some kind of ID and a working permit, which was issued by the police department. Now, he used to come to visit us, and we said, can you give us a blank? He said, this is very difficult. I said, he said, I'll try. And 2 weeks later, he came with a blank. You know, there was a network of resistance, and he came with a blank. Now, we had a friend also who had who could forge identity papers. He could get also a blank, and you could fill in your name. Now, we needed a name, a true name. Now, we had a cousin who was in Lyon, which was then occupied also. But originally it was not occupied, but then it became occupied. And she lived there, and we wrote to her, and she was dating, she was, a non-Jewish fellow. She passed for non-Jewish. And we said, could you try to get us a name and a birthday? Because you wanted a birth certificate in some way. So in the next letter, she gives us a name of that fellow she was going at, and she gave us the birthday and the place where he was born. So we wrote to the city hall of that place where he was born, asking for a birth certificate. But the fellow had given us a wrong birthday. The year was correct and the place was correct, but the birth date was incorrect. He had made himself older 3 or 4 months, and he gave a false birthday. Now we knew a superintendent. We didn't, and we told the superintendent, if you get a letter in that particular name, it's first. She said, oh, don't worry, I'll. So we wrote to the city hall saying we wish to have a birth certificate in this particular name. And a week later we received a birth certificate, and I looked and I said, I can't believe it. They found the name with the wrong birthday. They still mailed, they probably went through a lot of research to find the man. I don't know how it was recorded, but they actually found and they sent us the birth certificate. Now, when you had that, you had a true name, a true identity. Now, his friend that supplied the work permit, a blank, and there was another friend who had supplied a blank for identity card. I filled in, as I was writing, I filled in the information by, in these days you wrote by hand in ink. Now there was another problem. He did not have any ration, the book, food ration book, which is essential. I said, oh, I'll give you mine, and I'll claim that I lost it. Now, but my name was written. Now there's a way, it's written in ink, it's like a little book written in ink. You cut a potato in two, you apply it, and you leave it for a day, and the potato will suck the ink completely. And that it worked. The ink was absolutely, it was completely erased. Then we let it dry because it was wet. Then we took some dust, and there was plenty in the apartment, nobody cleaned, wiped it, like make it authentic. Then I filled in his name, his new name, and went to the police station. I said I had a hole in my pocket and I lost my ration book. And they said, okay, well, we'll give you a duplicate, but we're going to penalize you. So they penalized me. They took away some food, which I was entitled for 3 months, whatever. But he had a book. So he had already all the work permit, he had the birth certificate, he had the ID, and he had the ration book.
Who was the person whose name you used? Do you know anything about it? Whose name was used for the new ID?
The name was a French name. I mean, do you want to know the actual name?
I was just curious how the name came into your possession
no,
and
the cousin,
what channels.
The cousin who was living in Lyon supplied that name with a birthday. The cousin who lived in Lyon,
Yes.
we wrote for, they said, can you supply a name with a birthday? Now she was dating a fellow, she knew someone. She asked when she knew his name, we were Will Dumont, I think it was. It was a real French name.
So this was his name.
It was his
her
name.
friend's
He
name.
actually existed, but he had supplied the wrong birthday. Now, when we requested from the city hall of the place where he was born, they found, I don't know how but they managed to find the real. So they actually were two people under the same name. Now with the computerized, that wouldn't be possible. Then, that means then it was possible. Then, starting with the birthday and with a name, you could establish and fabricate a new identity, which was true, which somebody living under that particular, that's what he did. Now, one day he left, he took an Arab in Chartres, he didn't know, and he went into a hotel, he had a few money, a few francs, showed his idea, and the hotel owner, he said, look, he said, you're pretty young, you're not, they didn't send away for forced labor, because there was forced labor. Because he had made himself younger. He said, well, I'm only 19, although he was already 22, he said, I don't want to go. And the cafe owner, he said, listen, I can send you, he could see that there was some kind of, some illegal. He said, I could send you to somebody who works for the Resistance, who could get you a job in the farm. He said, okay. Now, and it was in a small place, in a hick, really in a very small village. And he went there, and he went to see that woman that was recommended by the cafe owner. And he said, I was sent by him. And he said, do you know how to work? Are you a farmhand? He was very weak. He said, oh, well, I could try. He said, okay, I'll send you to somebody. They need labor for the crop. It's crop season. So it was an absolute peasant situation, farm, completely isolated in a part of about 150 miles from Paris. Absolutely, wheat farming.
Do you know the name of the locality there?
Brandelon. It's a small place. So he applied, and the farmer, after he received a request, he received from an official from the government, from somebody who's sending him for, he was covered because he had requested labor, and they're sending him somebody, after all, he doesn't know. So he looks at my brother, so he says, have you ever worked in a farm? He said, no, I never worked in a farm. He said, where would you like to work? So he gave a bull story. I don't know, my mother divorced, and he gave a story. So he says, okay, let's see. He says, you see this bag of flour? It weighs 100 pounds. Try to carry it. Couldn't move it. He just couldn't move it. He said, okay, let's sit down, and I'll give you two. I'll feed you. Now, in a farm you eat well, and my brother has a pretty good appetite. So he gave him bacon and potatoes, meat, really fed him. you know, he could see he was a pretty good eater. So he says, "You're hired, and I'll tell you why. You know how to eat, so you'll know how to work." That, you know, from philosophy, you'll know how to work. You'll be able to move that bag of flour, and indeed he did. Within 2 weeks, he was moving even heavier load because he really, you know, and he would take care of horses and get up in the morning. You know, a farm hand.
During that time, he was as a non-Jew, of course.
There, yeah,
With this
because
new
he
identity.
he was using a French name. Not only that, but after several weeks, he applied for a registered identity card using the farmer as a witness. Since he had a work permit, he had a birth certificate, he applied for a new identity card which was absolutely recorded by the provincial city hall, you know, of Shah. They went when they said need, and they went and they gave him, and he was actually, he could have lived under that name, you know, forever, you know, because it was a true name with a birth certificate. He went to church, you know, on Sunday because in a small village, and that's that. Then he even came to visit us when you know, a huge, big, you know, flourishing face, you know, you could see by, you know, he was, you know, and we were pleased because we knew that he would be saved, that anything, you know, he had at least, he would be a survivor of all that particular period. That was in our day in 43. Things were getting much worse in Paris. People were arrested. Then they were extended the arrest to other groups, to women and children, and to older people. When we reached 1944, things became very tight. In March of 1944, they decided to deport all the remaining people that were available not the aliens, young and old. And in March of 1944, in the middle of the night, there's a knock, now in the middle of the night, and I remember it was it was like spring, it was April, it was like just springtime. And we don't know, and then there are two cops, usually two cops, the civilian and the cop, and he says, well, so I show him, he said, no, I received, now you're coming with us. No, you pack, you're coming with us, that's it. So we pack, and he put the seal on our door, because, you know, they seal. We reached the police station, they put us in a cell, and with all the other, all the Jews, you know, and they cry, and my sister was deported, and my child, and, you know, and what's going to happen to us, you know, and they're bad. So my father says, listen, he says, why don't you see that man at the desk and show him that you belong to that organization. Don't be shy. So I said, well, so there's a cop. I said, I'd like to talk to the man there at the desk. So he said, okay, talk. So I go out of the cell, and he's there on the phone. You know, it's the middle of the night. He looks at me. He said, what do you want? I said, well, we've been arrested, but I don't know. There might be a mistake because I belong to this organization, to that Juif. So he looks. He said, well, just a moment, let me see. And he calls the police headquarters, and he had trouble reaching them. It's the middle of the night, but it's full activity because it's the nights were wound up, everybody's up. And apparently he reached them, and I'm waiting. And then he says, well, I have, oh, it's okay. Oh, we can release them. Okay, we'll release them. Okay, you can go. and we're the only ones who leave. That's everybody gives me messages for this sister and for this son, and you know, and all these people, of course, were deported, and none, you know, they were too old. It was really just the last, and that was the last roundup of the, of you know, the major roundup in March of 1944. Now in the UGIF also, it was not without any problems, because they were assisting people and hiding a lot of Jews and giving out money. And with La Bienfaisance, where I've been recruited, you remember that there were two addresses, Rue La Bienfaisance, Rue de Téhéran. One day, apparently, I don't know what happened, they were requesting something from the organization, and they refused to supply the information, whatever. They came with a truck and arrested everybody. All the employees, and there must have been maybe 25, were arrested, including my benefactor, this woman who was so nice. She was arrested that day and was deported.
What was her name?
Mrs. Wolf. 2 months later, because of that, we had, there were 2 floors at the headquarters. I was working on the 4th floor, or 3rd floor, and there was, fourth floor, and on the 3rd floor, that was where the president and the other leading personalities were. So we had, with a friend of mine, we had provided and planned an escape route. I said, well, what can happen? Will La Bienfaisance make it happen to us? Maybe they'll come with a truck and arrest all of us. So we had planned an escape route through the roof. We went up, you know, and opened the door, and through the roof we would leave. And it happened. One day, they came with a truck. They didn't arrest the employees. They arrested the top leaders of the UGIF, among which was the André Bohr, who was a very leading personality with 4 children. He's a well-known banker who was the head of this, because he had refused to give out some information. There was Marcel Stora, who was a well-known translator, who had translated books by Remarque, you know, from the German. Armand Katz, there was Fernand Musnik. They all arrested them and deported them with their children and their family. Now we escaped through the roof, although we did not know, because the truck was there with Germans. We used the escape route that we had established, and we fled through the roofs on that particular day. But then we realized that they had left part of the management, and only the leaders had been arrested. So we continued working until the liberation of Paris, which was on the 25th of August 1944. You can just imagine the joy when the Americans arrived, you know, the absolutely, you know, just madness, you know, to have Americans, you know, coming, although there was the liberation of Paris with barricades, fighting the street. We knew that we saw the Germans leaving, you know, packing, and trucks and convoys and trains, especially from our view. We had a track, and they were leaving through the train. They was fighting even alongside the track a few days before the liberation of Paris, and we were liberated by the Americans.
How long did you know that the end was near? How long did
Well,
you sense it?
Of course, the end was near when, on D-Day, on the 6th of June, 1944, that day it was cloudy. I remember it was a little bit drizzling, and we came to the office, and then a friend of mine said, "You know, they've landed. We just heard from he had access to a radio. You know, they've landed, you know, because we were waiting for D-Day. We just didn't know when. So we knew that the end was near, although for the following few days, everything was in doubt because Germans were claiming so many successes. But once they had established a beachfront, beachhead, we knew that it would not last too long. But it still lasted almost 3 months, 2.5 months, until the 25th of August, 1944, when finally Paris was liberated. And 2 days later, my brother arrived. He hitchhiked on a jeep, you know. He was able to make his way back to Paris, and here we were, free. And I was still going to the office, you know, like, you know, because it was part of my job, you know, and the office was still open. And then all of a sudden, Americans came, and they said, okay, you're hired, you're the mail, okay, we are American Joint Distribution Committee, and you hired, you'll be part of the staff, and, you know, and I continued working there as a mail clerk with the American Joint Distribution Committee. Now, that, you know, it's like a continuation, working for these Jewish committees and working for the American Joint Distribution Committee in Paris.
What could you tell us something about some of the people in the Joint Distribution Committee and your relationships with them?
We had excellent relationship. They really liked me. I mean, they were very popular. There was the director. His name was Gwynley, Arthur D. Gwynley. He became later on a consultant. There was Cecilia Wazowski-Davidson, who was a very nice lady who helped me. There was Melvin Goldstein, who's still around, I understand, who still, I haven't seen him since I left, with his wife, Lolita. There was David Resnick, who was a public relations man. There was another man by the name of George Ruby, who spoke French. There was Mrs. Blanche Bernstein, who became commissioner of welfare, I think, in the city of New York. There was, you know, these people, and they really liked me. Some spoke a little bit of Yiddish. My English was not too good, and they were very sympathetic, and it's indirectly because of them that I'm here, because the Mrs. Cecilia Davidson, she's a, you know, nice lady, you know, elderly. So one day she said, you know, you were just by yourself. My father had met another woman. You know, when we realized that she was not my mother, you know, that was absolutely a shock to know that, you know, to find out what happened in these death camps. You know, it was absolutely horrible to know that, you know, we had hoped all these years that we would see them, and when we realized that we'd never see her again, it was a terrible shock. So in 1945, I'm jumping a year, my father had met somebody. He said, well, you know, you know, I'm by myself, you know, and, you know, it won't be the same like your mother, but, so what do you say? Okay, so I had a stepmother, and she brought in a daughter, so she came, and that we traded apartments with her, because the apartment, we could not live in the same apartment, so she gave us, with my brother, her apartment, and she came to live with my father and with her daughter. Now, my brother had got gotten engaged to his boss's daughter, He was working as in the line of the same line. He got a job after the liberation, and he started to date the boss's daughter, whom he married, and he's still married to her. 4 years of marriage. So I knew that my father was remarrying, my brother was also getting married, and I just didn't know what to do with myself. And this lady said, you know, you have 2 uncles in America. It would be nice to you, young man like you know, you could make a new life. And she said, I'm going back to the States. Why don't you give me a letter, and I will call your uncle, and then we will try to bring you over. So I mentioned that to my father, and he said, you know, all my life I wanted to go to the States. It's something which, you know, it will be the best, and my brother, you know, will take care of you, and everything will be just fine, you know, and everything, you know, it's, you know, American way of life, you know. And so I was tempted because the circumstances, you know, I would have liked to live in Paris, but there was a new life, new circumstances, and I felt that maybe I should do it, or try, or if something, you know, I said, but what am I going to do there? You know, how am I going to work? He said, I'm sure my brother will take care of you, you know. So he wrote a long letter to his brother, gave it to Cecilia Razowski-Davidson because she was going back, and she said, I'll call you. And also gave a letter for my other uncle, my mother's brother. I had 2 uncles. She came to New York, forgot about it. The letter was lying around for several, and all of a sudden, she looked, I forgot about Armand. So she calls, and the 2 uncles come running, because that was the first news that they ever had from that we were alive, you know. And she starts praising me, you know, telling, you know, what a wonderful person. So, and we should do, and, you know, under the emotion of the moment, you know, especially with tremendous amount of sympathy for European Jews, they said, yeah, we'll do anything. We'll send him affidavits, and we'll bring him over. And indeed, they sent me affidavits, which, with the help of the American Joint Distribution Committee, because they had some contact with the American Embassy, I was able to get a visa, immigration visa, and which brought me to the States in 1946 on the 13th of August. I left on the 5th of August. I sailed, and I remember that the final goodbye, you know, on the pier, you know, at Le Havre, still destroyed by the war, you know, with my brother crying, you know. So that's part of the story.
How old were you?
I was 19.
Do you remember your arrival?
Yes, I was greeted with a bunch of bananas instead of flowers. The sailing took a week, 8 days. It was called the SS, it was a Liberty ship, called SS Washington, and I arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning. My uncle I had never seen. I knew my cousin because he was in the army, and he had gone to Paris, and we met him shortly there. So he was waiting, and the other uncle with his wife, and they bought me some bananas, which, of course, we were still rationed, and of course on ship I put on 15 pounds in 8 days. I was eating really gorging with food, because we were still under the ration, you know, food rationing in 1946. It was still, you know, although it was that eased, but it was still, there was no food. So then one of my uncles, my mother's brother, put me up, and nothing happened. You know, he asked me, he said, you know, well, he had a business. He was in the embroidery business, like the side of my mother. They were in the embroidery. I forgot to mention that. And he became an embroiderer, and he had a little business with maybe 10 workers, you know, and he was very well off. And so he gave me a room in his apartment. He said, well, I said, you know, I have no trade. Why don't you teach me your trade? He refused. He said, no, this is not for you, you know. Of course, he was employing his 2 sons-in-law in the business, and he didn't want any stranger. You know, where I was a stranger, he didn't know me. So he said, no, I have something else for you. So he knew some people with whom he was in business, and he got me a job on Union Square as a stock clerk, doing for $24 a week. That was the minimum wage, 60 cents an hour. My English was poor, and they used me as a stock clerk, and I worked for 2 weeks, and it was pulling clothing, and it was in a certain environment which was not mine, you know, rough people, you know, hey, Frenchy, you know, and, you know, all kinds of remarks, you know. So after the second week, I went to ask for a raise. So they liked me, they said, we'll give you $28. So I stayed another week. Then somebody came to visit my uncle, and he said, oh, there's a job for you. If you want, you can get $32. But it has to be in a factory. You'll be a shipping clerk. I don't care. So all of a sudden I quit that, and I took the job for $32. But the environment was terrible. It was a sweatshop. You know, the line of operators, you know, working these bathrobes, then the black girls packing and chatting all day, you know. I was working, my supervisor was also black. I couldn't understand. He was from the South. He couldn't. But my job consisted in taking an order, putting it into boxes, and marking the address and mailing it out. It was not my kind of environment. And so now comes another piece of fate, which is interesting mentioning. When I left the joint, they made a party for me because they liked me. The Arthur D. Gwynley was the director, gave me a watch. You know, he said, here, there's a watch. They gave me a book with all the signatures, and they gave me various messages of addresses, messages, little, you know, because if I'm, you know, calling, giving. One of the ladies who was working there, you know, the UNRWA, you know, uniform, says, listen, he says, if you need a job, why don't you contact my sister? She works for an employment agency, the U.S. Employment Agency on Madison Avenue. Here, and she scribbled the address and the phone number, and I had all kinds of, I must have had maybe 50 messages, so it was there. I kept everything. Being very unhappy, working in a factory under a very strange environment, eating a sandwich on the sidewalk for 30 minutes and waiting for the freight elevator was not exactly the kind of work which I envisaged to do in the U.S., you know. So I remembered, I said, maybe I should call this lady, you know. So one Monday morning, I called in sick, you know, in the place. And I called this lady. I got her on the phone. I said, you know, I have regards from your sister in Paris. And she said, oh, and you want a job? You better come right away. I said, yeah, come right away. I said, fine. So I took the subway to Madison, and I come in, and here she is. She's pregnant. She said, you know, today is my last day. I'm going on maternity leave tomorrow. If you would have come tomorrow, you would not find me. This is my last day. So she said, okay, what can you do? I said, well, what kind of education? I said, high school, you know. She said, would you like to work for the UN? I said, UN? What is that? She said, you know, United Nations and a new organization. But she said, well, it's a little bit far. It's at Lake Success. You have to take a train. Then she calls up, and because they were recruiting for the first General Assembly, and they said, okay, so I'm sending you a young man, you know, and she called up officer personnel. And then she says, do you know how to get there? I said, no, well, you take Penn Station, you go to White Neck, then you have to take a bus. She said, do you have any money? Takes out $5, gives it to me. She said, don't worry about it. You know, $5, well, you know, it's like $50, you know, in 46. I said, don't worry about it. So I take the train, get off, and I'm recruited to start on the first session of the General Assembly on Tuesday, the 23rd of October, 1946. Working at night at first, because they have a night shift. In the daytime, I went to Newark High School to improve on my English. And then in 1948, still working for the UN, I started college in the evening. And I went for 8 years. And I picked up, finally, 128 credits, and I got me a Bachelor of Business Administration.
What kind of work did you do originally?
So, okay, so they assigned me to the proofreaders department. I was like an assistant to proofreading. They needed somebody to, in French, because of my French linguistics, to work as a French assistant to a proofreader. But I became very interested in the job, and I felt that, you know, it was a professional job. Eventually, I did reach I became a full-fledged proofreader, and then I became a copy preparer, then I became a supervisor, then I became head of the entire unit with 50 people. And that, of course, I stayed there for 41 years. So this is a little bit of my career at the UN. So that's what happened.
Do you have any concluding statement that you would like to tell us?
I think that I believe in fate and destiny and a certain, you know, that the human being go through life, and that it's very difficult to escape those who were deported, like my mother and my brother and 6 million others. It was their fate to be picked up and those who managed to escape, like myself and my father, through a series of miracles, also it was their destiny. It was, I think there is a thread which runs through, which links all these little events when I think of myself, of being waved by this cup when my mother was arrested, and to being recruited because I went for a parcel of clothing to this particular place, and to be recruited by that particular place that gave me a certain amount of immunity, and then to go on and to start working for the American Joint Distribution Committee as a result of all these events, and then to come to the U.S., and then because of this woman to start working for the UN, where I made a career. I think there is something which you cannot fight. It's a certain flow of events that leads from one event into the other, and that's what I would call destiny. But of course, there are other things, I don't know when to, things are not that easy, it was difficult years, even at the UN, with the administration, with problems of disguised discrimination. They knew I was Jewish. It's, things are not that easy, it was not smooth sailing all the way, even in the U.S. The beginning we were very hard, going to school, working at Lake Success, and going 4 nights a week to Brooklyn College, and carrying 9 credits, 3 courses. It was very difficult in the evening, coming home at 11 o'clock, and then the next day you have to prepare for, you have homework, and working all week, and having to work during the weekend, and preparing for exams, midterms, tests, and it's not an easy way of doing things.
What was your living circumstance at the time?
Well, after I was very family-oriented, and I always needed the surrounding of a family, which I lacked, with the disappearance of my mother. And I lived with my uncle, though after a while I could feel that, they felt that I should leave, but I was hanging on for 2 years. And then I got into a furnished room. Never had my own apartment. A furnished room in the vicinity where I stayed for 8 years until I got married in 1957. Then, of course, I had my own apartment. But I still kept contact with my 2 uncles, my father's brother and my mother's brother. We were in good terms until my mother's brother died in 1967, and my father's brother is still alive. He's 105, and I take care of him because I'm his only relative in the New York area.
And you were in contact with your father during those years?
No, that's another. Oh yeah, you want that was caused a problem because his French was poor and he never wrote any French, and we spoke Yiddish at home, and working for the UN allowed me to travel. They gave me home leave every 2 years. I was a free trip. And one of the trips in 1948, he said, why don't you learn how to write in Yiddish? I said, but I can't. I mean, he said, oh, you can do it. So returning in 1948 from one of those trips, we had a rabbi's daughter working, was already a junior proofreader, and she was working for me, and I mentioned that particular problem that I had to deal through third parties, letters. It's not easy, sometimes you have things personal to say. And so she said, well, that's simple. I mean, so I'll teach you the script, and it's by sound, and you'll be able to write. So she taught me, she wrote the alphabet, and I remember in the subway coming back to Brooklyn, I was teaching myself in these little letters, and I was able to learn to memorize them. Then it was Rosh Hashanah, New Year, so I wrote a little letter in French, and then I added something in Yiddish, which took me maybe an hour and a half, letter by letter, wishing my father a happy New Year, and best of health for the coming year. A week later, do I get a letter in Yiddish? I said, now I'm in trouble. Now, it must have taken me 3 hours to decipher, character by character, what he meant. And then I started to write, with tremendous amount of pain, because, it would take me hours, every letter. But then it went easy and easy and easy. And we wrote to each other for 40 years in Yiddish until last year when he passed away. I think we must have, we wrote, I figured 2,000 letters in 40 years. We wrote in 2,000 letters, I figured. We corresponded in 40 years. We exchanged. Yes. And we used to see each other for every other year. I brought him here in 47. He stayed for 6 months with his brother. He hadn't seen for 38 years. I was able to bring him over. And also again through the UN, I was able to get him a visa, a temporary visa, and he stayed for 6 months. Then I brought him over when I got married in 1957 for the wedding. So he came twice to the US. Didn't particularly like it. So that was that.
I think we have to stop now so we can
Okay.
go on and get these. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.